we might begin, Lou. Thank you very much for the prayers.
Taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. And may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, to the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara. How should any son that lineage trained who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son to the lineage or daughter to the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Kayato om gate gate paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shantideva Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away all the darkness of all ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas visualized before me, this mandala built on the base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorns with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all my possessions, which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhamma Karma wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakamnayatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious gurus.
I'm going to begin slightly differently today. So I wanted firstly to read a passage from Guy Newland's book, A Buddhist Grief Observed. Guy Newland writes, "Let's not fool ourselves. Meditation on death and impermanence does not magically make us invulnerable or transhuman. Losing those we love hurts. When his daughter died of smallpox, Kobayashi Issa wrote, I quote, 'The world of Jew is indeed a world of Jew, and yet. And Issa comments on his poem, I knew that it is no use to cry, that water once flown past the bridge does not return, and scattered blossoms are gone beyond recall. Yet, try as I would, I could not, simply could not cut the binding cord of human love.'" So it's with the deepest sadness that we share the news that our most precious Guru Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche stopped breathing yesterday morning and is now sitting in meditation at Kopan Monastery in Nepal. Claire Izzet writes on behalf of the Venerable Roger Kunsang, dear friends, our precious Guru is sitting in meditation at Kopan Monastery. Rinpoche had been up in the mountains in the Sum Valley since Monday and had to be brought down urgently as Rinpoche was experiencing altitude sickness. On arrival back in Kathmandu this morning, this is referring to yesterday, Rinpoche stopped breathing. The main doctor at Karuna Hospital tried for some time to revive Rinpoche, but that was not successful. Rinpoche entered meditation at about 9:30 a.m. Nepal time, today, Thursday, April the 13th. His Holiness has been informed and is giving advice. The Lama Gupas and monks are taking turns in sessions offering Chittamani Tara with Rinpoche, as advised by His Holiness. Other pujas and prayers are being offered in Kopan. Kardrola has advised that it is the most precious and important time for students. Kardrola went on to advise that the best thing to do at this time is to practice bodhicitta in particular, as well as impermanence in the context of the Lam Rim, and then also as much as one can to help fulfill the Guru's holy wishes. Kardrola insisted that we should take this opportunity to try to achieve all or some of the Lam Rim in our practice, our own practice. Meditating and praying to the Guru to receive his blessings and guidance is most important. And to try as much as possible to complete Rinpoche's projects and holy wishes. So already to generate that wish that we'll be able to do that. Please pray and dedicate for Rinpoche to be reborn as quickly as possible in a place where he can be very quickly recognized and will be of most benefit to sentient beings. Please keep trying to fulfill Rinpoche's holy wishes, especially to practice impermanence and bodhicitta in the context of the Lam Rim. Fulfilling the Guru's holy wishes is a very important part of inviting the Guru to return. As you know, Rinpoche was the embodiment of bodhicitta and always stressed the importance of remembering impermanence and the essential need to put our practices, our teachings into practice. This is what we can do for our precious Guru now. Please try to follow Rinpoche's heart advice. We can all connect with the Guru and receive the blessings of the Guru in this way. Now is a very important time to be doing this. Our hearts are breaking. We'll take all our support from Rinpoche's teachings and the guidance of His Holiness and our teachers and in the FPMT family. Big love on behalf of Venerable Roger Kunsang from the FPMT International Office. And today, I am sure it's circulating around the world, a very beautiful tribute and condolences were sent out by His Excellence Ling Rinpoche, who writes, "Dear students and friends of Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, it is with the deepest sadness that I offer my condolences on the passing of the incomparable Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche had a close personal relationship and received many teachings from my predecessor, His Holiness the Sixth Kabje Ling Rinpoche, throughout his lifetime. I had a very close spiritual and personal relationship with Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche throughout my own lifetime, from birth up until now. So this news is unbelievably sad and shocking to hear. For all of us who are Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche's disciples, this is the greatest teaching our Lama can give, the teaching on impermanence. Therefore, we must not be discouraged or lose hope. We can feel even more encouraged to put Rinpoche's teachings into practice and to continue working towards a swift fulfillment of Rinpoche's pure and vast aspirations and prayers. Please take this opportunity to rejoice in how incredibly fortunate we have been to receive Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachings and blessings, and to witness the profound example of Rinpoche's amazing life and accomplishments. This can inspire us to continue with our practice and not be discouraged. I offer my deepest heartfelt condolences to all of you who are grieving now, all around the world, especially all the students, staff, volunteers and friends of Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche's FPMT organisation. Please join with me in praying for Rinpoche's swift return. With my love and prayers, Ling Rinpoche, 13th of April, 2023. So I return now to Kadrola's advice. I quote again, Kadrola has advised that this is the most important and precious time for students. She went on to advise that the best thing for the students to do at this time is to practice bodhicitta in particular, as well as impermanence in the context of the Lam Rim, and also, as much as one can, help to fulfill the Guru's holy wishes. And so to this, I think we can add, or should add, His Excellence Ling Rinpoche's advice to take this opportunity to rejoice in how incredibly fortunate we have been to receive Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachings and blessings, and to witness the profound example of Rinpoche's amazing life and accomplishments. And as Ling's Excellence Ling Rinpoche continues, this can inspire us to continue with our practice and not to be discouraged. So I feel that this is the way to approach this session, the 13th on Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life, as part of the FPMT Basic Program. This is especially the case as we're up to the point in the text where Shantideva is asking us to rejoice in the taking of the Bodhisattva vows. So if we stop to meditate for a few moments, we will recognize that Kabje Zopa Rinpoche would be delighted that we are proceeding in this way and thereby fulfilling his holy wishes, that bodhicitta, together with giving and taking, are being regarded as our main practice. As only in this way can we take full and perfect responsibility for caring for all our suffering mothers in the best conceivable way. So it's only due to the blessings of our holy gurus that we are currently able to share this moment together, to actually be sitting on our seats, sharing this moment. Without Lama Yeshe and Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, we might not even have heard the word bodhicitta. But if we have, it should be our principal aim in this life to actualize it at the level of unshakable realization, because this will lead to unshakable deeds benefiting others. It's in this way we can carry it forward from lifetime to lifetime, nurturing it the precious mind of bodhicitta as we go, so that all beings may be nurtured as our most precious ones. So in the first chapter of the Nectar of Bodhicitta, which is Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary on this very beautiful and profound text by the Kunu Lama, which has been translated as vast as the heavens, deep as the sea, and which is also a frequent text of commentary with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Under the heading in the book of Kabje Zopa Rinpoche's book, The Nectar of Bodhicitta, under the heading, every action we do should be done with bodhicitta, Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, whatever action we do with a selfish motivation is not only a complete waste of time, it causes only future suffering. On the other hand, any action done with a selfless bodhicitta motivation is utterly worthwhile. Therefore, every action we do, every action should be done with the thought to benefit others. As Kunu Lama Rinpoche says in the Jewel Lamp, I quote, when we walk, walk with bodhicitta. When we sit, sit with bodhicitta. When you stand, stand with bodhicitta. When you sleep, sleep with bodhicitta. When you look, look with bodhicitta. When you eat, eat with bodhicitta. When you speak, speak with bodhicitta. When you think, think with bodhicitta. And Rinpoche's commentary, 24 hours a day, every action we do should be done with bodhicitta, not for ourselves, but for others. No matter what action we do, if it's done with the mind cherishing others, it's a Dharma action, one that will lead us to peerless happiness and lead all others to peerless happiness. On the other hand, as long as our actions don't oppose the self-cherishing thought, they are worldly actions done out of worldly concern and can only result in increasing our ignorance and in having to experience future suffering. Rinpoche continues, I was so inspired by Kunu Lama Rinpoche's verses that I thought that it might be good to advertise them to people, for people, to see them and to bring them into their lives. And so he's referring here to printing the verses, one of the verses from Kunu Lama's text onto cups, so that every time we drink from that cup, as Rinpoche says, we can remember the mind of bodhicitta. He also suggests that we can use it as a bumper sticker on our car. And Rinpoche continues, one way I actually did this was by having some people produce bookmarks with these ideas on them. They became very popular. We modified the verses for the bookmark, which finally said, I quote, it is possible to do every action with bodhicitta. When we eat to satisfy our greed. And if we can eat to sustain ourselves, or we can eat to sustain ourselves in order to best help others. The purpose of our life is, says Rinpoche, is to help free all beings from suffering. That's the reason we are alive. That's the reason for our survival each day, each hour, each minute, to eliminate the suffering of every kind mother sentient being. With this motivation, every second of our life becomes incredibly meaningful, not narrow, but infinite, like the limitless sky, vast as the heavens. It gives meaning to every tiny thing we do. With a bodhicitta motivation, every action becomes a dharma action. Every action becomes immense with great, great meaning. When we generate bodhicitta, such as saying the refuge and bodhicitta prayer with our palms together to the Buddha, we collect far greater merit than making offerings of Buddha fields equaling the number of grains of sand of the Ganges River, filled with jewels, diamonds, silver, and gold. If the benefits could materialize, even the sky would not be big enough to hold them. So these verses are very important because they clearly show us that everything we do must be done with bodhicitta. It is hypocritical to pray to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, and then a few minutes later, continue to work purely for one's own happiness. Again, Kunulamba Rinpoche says, going somewhere, remember bodhicitta. Sitting down, remember bodhicitta. Lying down, remember bodhicitta. Standing up, remember bodhicitta. So I might just a few moments of quiet meditation and reflection to really generate a powerful resolve to live with bodhicitta in this way. Thank you. So we're returning now to the nine remaining verses of chapter 3 of chapter 3's heading is Full Acceptance of the Awakening Mind. As His Holiness mentioned, and I quoted this last week, after taking the vows, utilizing the presentation found in Shantideva's text, that traditionally we should now recite the last 9 verses of the chapter as a conclusion of taking the vow. So we're going to look at those 9 verses because they exhort us to manifest intense joy, as it is necessary to celebrate the great auspiciousness of the step we have just taken. So verse 25, in order to further increase it from now on, those with discernment who have lucidly seized an awakening mind in this way should highly praise it in the following manner. Verse 26, today my life has borne fruit. Having well obtained this human existence, I've been born in the family of a Buddha, and now am one of the Buddha's children. So regarding verse 25, Gyaltsabje importantly indicates that the purpose of joy in the form of praise and delight is that it facilitates the increase of our awakening mind. This is really very, very special to consider. And we'll notice that Ling Rinpoche also said to rejoice that we've received these precious teachings in such an extraordinary way from Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So it seems contradictory to say we're rejoicing in this moment, but that's why I read that beautiful poem out at the beginning, because it is so difficult navigating this situation emotionally, as you can imagine. But we have to navigate it, and we have to navigate it directly towards the purpose of achieving the bodhicitta instructions that we have so fortunately received. And so rejoicing, as Shantideva is explaining and Gyaltsen Sabje is commenting, is an incredibly potent way of ripening the momentum that we've so fortuitously established. Gyaltsen Sabje says, after the wise bodhisattvas have taken the two bodhicittas, referring to conventional or aspiring and engaging, with a very clearful, joyful mind and faith, they engage in methods for it to not degenerate and to increase its practice. Towards this end, this is a very important clue as to the meaning of rejoicing here. Towards this end, they generate joy and praise the mind. So this is an example where we can actually praise ourselves for even attempting to generate this mind, because we're not praising ourselves from a worldly perspective. We're kind of paying tribulation, if you like, we're open to the incredible enormity of what it is we're attempting to do and why. And because its purpose is so entirely virtuous in the very, very deepest way imaginable, it's something we should wholeheartedly celebrate and throw ourselves into. So it's this purpose, this special significance of uplifting our mind, which is to be kept in mind here, but it's to be kept in mind whenever we perform a virtuous deed, even the smallest one. Regarding the second verse, today my life has borne fruit, having well obtained this human existence. I've been born in the family of the Buddha, and thus have become a Buddha's child. Geshe Topton says, when we recite this praise, the joy of having generated such a mind is equal to the joy of a young beggar who has been chosen by a king as his successor to the throne. Having generated bodhicitta, we have become princes of the Buddha's family. We are on the path to enlightenment. And for this reason, our happiness is beyond compare. So, as Geshe Doga also explains, we have ample grounds for rejoicing in this way, for taking the vows we have just done or have aspired to do. And it is, quote, the most supreme way of taking the essence of this precious human life, the most important way of taking the essence of this precious human life. So that puts everything we're doing and feeling at the moment into an incredible perspective. And this is why Ling Rinpoche is suggesting, I would suggest in my own clumsy way, that we're to throw ourselves with even greater force into this need to actualize bodhicitta and its deeds, because this is truly utilizing our base at the moment for the greatest possible purpose. And so my question here is, do we actually recognize this? Do we actually acknowledge this? Do we actually think this? All other ways of seeking to extract the essence of this precious human rebirth now fall into their appropriate positions. And what I mean by that is that all of the practices encapsulated in the Lam Rim are now seen to be fulfilling the purpose that we have laid out with the Bodhisattva mind. Our pathway ahead is now completely, unambiguously clear. And every step we make will now bear this great purpose. So this has an important corollary. All worldly ambitions as have dominated and driven our actions in the past, meaning countless past rebirths, will now melt away as insignificant. So all our worldly attachments can drop away now, because they're not only irrelevant to the great purpose that we're setting ourselves, but they obstruct it if we're still lingering with attachment. So this has a further implication that the elaborate network of afflicted minds that were employed to feed these worldly ambitions will now begin to unravel. And that image of a knot is really, really powerful, because a knot takes a certain internal constriction or restraint from within itself to hold itself in position as a knot. And we all know, if we struggle to untie a knot, that we reach a certain point where suddenly it's almost, I'm going to use the word voluptuously, the knot relaxes and falls apart. And so this, I'm going to suggest here, is what will happen to our afflicted impulses if we focus on the mind of bodhicitta. So, in other words, a genuine renunciation now becomes a real prospect. Not just a renunciation based on repudiating worldly attachments, as just mentioned, though this is involved, but a renunciation that is directly nurtured by our bodhicitta motivation, because for the first time we see that the purpose of our actions of body, speech, and mind are none other than that of serving the needs of all sentient beings' happiness, both temporal and ultimate. This is because we can see that their suffering is due to our own lack of renunciation. What I'm getting at here is that we perpetuate the conditions for the suffering of others while we continue to generate afflicted minds, because we actually hurt and injure others. This has been our legacy from time immemorial. So by generating this precious mind of bodhicitta, as we're going to see from some of Shantideva's verses shortly, we actually relinquish them of that portion of pain. This is really an extraordinary way of thinking. So our renunciation and our bodhicitta become united, gathered, as it were, behind this singular, wondrous purpose of exclusively working for the benefit of others. Gyaltsab Sabje's heading for the next verse, 27, reads, meditating on conscientiousness after having found such a mind. 27, thus, whatever actions I do from now on must be in accord with the family. Never shall I disgrace or pollute this noble and unsullied race. and Gyaltsabje's commentary, if one thinks whether this alone is enough, from now on, I shall engage in actions of the three doors that benefit the lineage of the Buddha. I shall strive in the method in a way that does not sully this holy lineage, which is adorned only by qualities and is faultless in the beginning, middle, and end. So the emphasis here is on conscientiousness, which is one of the key mental factors for protecting our vows and commitments, indeed our ethical purity in general. Without it, we have no mechanism of restraint. And without restraint, we are thrown back upon our customary, habitual, afflicted, self-cherishing thoughts. And the incredible chance we have now just been offered in the form of receiving the vows or wishing to receive the vows is carelessly and stupidly squandered. So we seek to be conscientious in order to eschew, to avoid any actions not befitting a Bodhisattva, as exemplified by the lineage of our founder, Shakyamuni Buddha. In other words, we seek to exactly emulate the Buddha and thus embrace the Buddha's code of conduct. We seek to mirror it in modern psychological parlance. So not to seek to emulate those of the Buddha lineage, referring to the Bodhisattva children, is doubly shameful because it represents a failure to act appropriately on our own part as a trainee Bodhisattva, but it also lets others down because we will not be coming to their aid as we have promised. Thus, in this singular failure to uphold our bodhicitta commitment, we let everyone down. So, in order to further emphasize that we should thoroughly and joyously appreciate the goodness and auspiciousness of our current situation, having just taken the bodhicitta vow, Shantideva now presents 5 verses which present the meaning via analogy. So verse 28 engages the analogy of the blind man. Just like a blind man discovering a jewel in a heap of rubbish, likewise, by some coincidence, an awakening mind has been born in me. And 29, which has the analogy of ambrosia and inexhaustible treasures. 29, it is the supreme ambrosia that overcomes the sovereignty of death. It is the inexhaustible treasure that eliminates all poverty in the world. So the reference to overcoming the sovereignty of death is referring to overcoming self-grasping. To capture the meaning, Geshe Doga quotes from the prayer to Maitreya, which reads, "Bodhicitta bars the way to unfortunate destinies. It is the great teaching that leads to the highest realms, and even to the state beyond old age and death. So we'll notice that His Holiness the Dalai Lama often quotes this verse by way of his own commentary on this verse of Shantideva's, as it perfectly encapsulates the advantages of bodhicitta. And Geshe Doga adds that bodhicitta is not just destroying the Lord of Death and barring the way to unfortunate destinies in some miraculous, mysterious external way. Rather, it is capable of doing this due to the intrinsic properties of the mind of bodhicitta itself. And it's this intrinsic nature of bodhicitta that is why we can throw ourselves completely into its trust, if you like. We can be entrusted to it, but we can also entrust ourselves to it because it's the perfect object of entrustment. As the great Kunu Lama Rinpoche says, the sheer fact of having bodhicitta within one's own continuum, own mental continuum, naturally, I emphasize the word naturally here, naturally brings solace, great solace to others. Even animals feel a great sense of comfort and fearlessness, not to mention humans and other beings alike. So Geshe Doga quotes this verse, and he also quotes another verse of the Kunu Lama. If one wishes to benefit other sentient beings, that is done through bodhicitta. If one wishes to be the friend of others, that is the best way to do that is through developing bodhicitta. Being a source of reliance, then that is achieved by bodhicitta. So this idea of becoming a source of reliance, because we have bodhicitta, bears great significance, because it means that we are reliable and absolutely trustworthy as an object of focus or attention by others, because we are not under any circumstance going to harm them or work against their interests. And not only that, we're going to bestow everything we possibly can, every imaginable thing we possibly can for their sole benefit. So that the reference to animals is interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, I'm looking after a friend's dog at the moment, and that dog gravitates to friendly people straight away when we're walking. It knows a friendly person at the very end of the street, and its tail starts wagging and it starts jumping to meet them. Other people it meets, it kind of looks a little bit startled, its ears go down, its tail drops, and it sort of clings close to my leg as we walk past. Isn't that interesting, what is going on? So when Shantideva says that poverty is eliminated, as Kenshin Trunggu says in his commentary of the same verse, quote, if we have Buddhahood, we will have everything we need, end of quote. So viewed from this totally accomplished perspective, all sentient beings would be immured in a chronic state of poverty from which they would need to escape. So what we're getting at here is that we're not just talking about ordinary poverty, meaning a lack of material resources. We're saying that from a bodhisattva's perspective, all sentient beings are in a state of poverty because they are not able to realize their potential easily, and we need to assist them to do that in every possible way. So this is how we should interpret Shantideva's mention of all poverty in the world. That the word all, it's embracing all worldly sentient beings. So to overcome that poverty, if we have it ourselves, of course, bears the meaning that we have to gain control of one's own circumstances. And it is in this comprehensive way of gaining control over our own circumstances that we can begin to work to overcome the loss of control experienced by trapped sentient beings. So the point there is, if we're not under control ourselves, in the sense of being able to be self-reliant, to be a kind of refuge, if you like, a safe haven, how on earth are we going to extend that to others? So the next analogy, verse 30, the analogy of supreme medicine and the analogy of the tree, it reads, "It is the supreme medicine that quells the world's disease. It is the tree that shelters all beings, wandering and tired of the path of conditioned existence." So similar to the mention of poverty in the immediate preceding verses, we should interpret the world's disease here to mean more than physical illness. It is referring to the disease of migrators. Venture to say it's referring to the disease of migrating uncontrollably through the force of karma and delusion that are tossing us over and over and over again into samsaric states. So the reference here, sort of implicit in Shantideva's verse, is to the revolving nature of the 12 links of interdependent origination, the first of which is innate self-grasping ignorance. Unless that is overcome by the realization of emptiness, such cycling, such compulsive migrating cannot be stopped. Thus, what quells in this context are the instructions, what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. So they're Eshidoga's words. He's synthesizing the meaning here of the stanza. It's pointing to what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected or abandoned. Thus, we are ushered into the indispensable realm of applied Dharma practice. More specifically, we're being introduced to the real meaning of a Bodhisattva's ethical practice, a topic we are about to explore extensively in Shantideva's 4th chapter. So the next analogy is the analogy of the bridge and the analogy of the dawning moon. And Sabje's heading for the opening 2 lines are, it destroys specifically the sufferings of the lower realms. So verse 31 reads, "It is the universal bridge that leads to freedom from unhappy states of rebirth." And the second 2 lines, "It is the dawning moon of the mind that dispels the torment of disturbing conceptions." So Geshe Doga indicates that one is freed from rebirths in the lower realms by dint of adopting pure morality, namely adopting the 10 virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind, and opposing and eliminating their exact opposites, the 10 non-virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind. And it is on this basis that a sentient being can ensure a high rebirth. So Gyaltsabje places the final two lines, which are, "It is the dawning moon of the mind that dispels the torment of disturbing conceptions," under the heading, "It can eliminate the cause." So the analogy of the moon works in the following way. As Gyaltsabje's commentary reads, "This mind generation is also the shining moon that eliminates the heat and misery of the affliction of migrators. That is, it has the power to eliminate all afflictive obscurations." So these are what are encapturing sentient beings into this endless wheel of suffering. So this cooling, soothing moon is therefore none other, in this context, than the mind generation of bodhicitta itself. The heat it dispels are the afflictions tormenting, like scorching heat, the bodies and minds of all suffering sentient beings. So the analogy, therefore, revolves around the manner in which the main afflictive obscuration, that is the grasping at the self and the delusions in general, are overcome by bodhicitta. There is a further significance in the word bridge. In the opening line, "It is the universal bridge," because in Tibetan, it has a connotation of a platform from which one cannot fall. Cannot fall, we can't slide backwards, if you like. We're protected in that place. So this means bodhicitta leads inexorably towards increasing positive and beneficial states. First, the causes of the lower realms are eliminated, then samsara in general, and finally, the obscurations to omniscience. This description, this developmental description here, has great significance in understanding Pendrola's request that we practice to realize the Lam Rim with the mind of bodhicitta, because we're needing to progress through all of those stages in order to accomplish our bodhicitta goal. So it's in this comprehensive sense that it is a universal bridge, not the local bridge down the road. This is a cosmological bridge because it reaches each and every sentient being and provides them with a platform of safety from which they will not fall. So the next analogy is the analogy of the sun and the analogy of butter. And Gyaltsabje places verse 32 under the heading, "Eliminating the obscurations to knowledge." So you can see here how we're developing the exposition, or Shantideva is. "It is the great sun that finally removes the misty ignorance of the world. It is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of Dharma." So the great sun stands for bodhicitta that can remove the cataract-like obscurations to knowledge completely. There are multiple ways in which this can be understood. For example, bodhicitta serves as a means to accomplish a great accumulation of merit. This in turn is accomplished by the practice of the 6 perfections, which are likewise practiced in dependence on bodhicitta. Due to these assembled intersupporting factors, the accumulated merit is able to completely exhaust the obscurations to omniscience. Nothing else can. They cannot be exhausted in any other way. In other words, without bodhicitta, we lack the momentum, the capacity necessary to proceed beyond the Hinayana grounds and paths, and thus we lack the ability to venture beyond the accomplishment of liberation alone. So if we talk about limited liberation in this context, it's not a criticism. It's saying that it's limited in the very specific sense that the obscurations to omniscience are remaining to be overcome. So all of the practices of the 3rd scope are entailed here. Geshe Doga brings this particular sort of investigation of meaning in this verse to a very, very practical footing. He says, this shows it is our own responsibility to eliminate these imprints, referring to the imprints that are obstructing omniscience. We need to realize that we cannot expect others to remove our obscurations, and we need to take the initiative to do it ourselves. This is what we need to derive as a personal instruction. End of quote. So thus, we are not to distinguish self-reliance here from our goal of working for others. Rather, in order to work for others, we must remove our obscurations. We must remove our obscurations. And in order to do this, we must take the responsibility and resolve entirely upon our own shoulders. Bodhicitta is our initiative to fulfill. It is magical thinking to conclude or act otherwise. The Buddhas of themselves cannot save us. This reminds me of a very famous sutra passage that His Holiness the Dalai Lama so frequently quotes. Buddhas do not wash away sins with water, nor do they remove the suffering of others with their hands. Neither do they transplant their realizations into others. Teaching the truth of suchness, they liberate beings. So His Holiness glosses this sutric quote. This means that the Buddhas do not wash away sins with water, nor remove our suffering with their hands, nor pass on their knowledge to people. The only way is by learning his teachings, such as the Four Noble Truths. Only in this way can we remove the suffering of people. So what I mean by taking on the responsibility. Geshe Sopa says in relation to this sutric quote, the Buddhas have to do something and we have to do something. The Buddhas cannot wash away our stains with water, like washing clothing. The root of misery and suffering cannot be extracted like a thorn from the foot. The Buddhas can only show us the way to pull out the thorn. The hand that pulls it out must be our own. Also, the Buddha cannot transplant his knowledge into others. He is like a doctor who diagnoses our illnesses and prescribes the cure that we must follow through personal responsibility. If a patient does not take the prescribed medicine or follow the advice, the doctor cannot help, no matter how strong her medicines or excellent her skills. So the crunch, as Geshe Doga so often emphasizes, is that we must be our own masters. This was the very first teaching that I received from Geshe Doga at a teacher center in 1983, when I had actually gone to on my first Tibetan Buddhist meditation course, and it's when I met my precious teachers, and Kabje Zopa Rinpoche was leading that course. I've mentioned this before in one of my talks, and Geshe Doga was the resident Geshe at a teacher center at that time, and Geshe Dawa, who was the resident Geshe at Tara Institute in Melbourne, also was attending on that first day that I was there to participate in a guru puja. So Geshe Doga, when he was asked by Rinpoche to give us the students a teaching on refuge in the Little Gompa, while he was preparing to give the 21 Tara initiation, began his topic on the meaning of refuge in terms of becoming one's own master. This is the meaning of going for refuge in a very deep way. The butter analogy. Gyaltsabje places the analogy of butter under the following heading: achieving all benefit. So what is derived from the milk of Dharma is particularly the practice of exchanging self and others, independence upon which we generate bodhicitta. And due to this, great joy, because it is the way that we can naturally and spontaneously work for the benefit of all others. The essence of Dharma is none other than bodhicitta. As Geshe Doga explains, as the analogy explains, just as the tastiest part of butter is the essence of butter, the tastiest part of the Buddha's doctrine, its essence, is achieving the benefit of all sentient beings through having cultivated bodhicitta. Therefore, one needs to develop that which serves as the very essence of the Dharma. End of quote. So certainly we do begin with seeking to generate it with only meager steps, but by persistence and developing skill captured by the analogy of consistently, rigorously, and without pause, churning the curd in order to produce butter, we do eventually attain a fully fledged, naturally and spontaneously arising bodhicitta. Thus, there is nothing more important upon which to focus than on the supreme instructions of how we are to make this happen. The analogy of the travelling guest, verse 33, achieving every happiness. For those guests travelling on the path of conditioned existence, who wish to experience the bounties of happiness, this will satisfy them with joy and actually place them in great bliss. Kunzang Pelden comments, the numberless beings that live in the six realms are like wayfarers traveling along the paths of existence, from the peak of existence down to the hell of unrelenting pain. To help those who wish to enjoy the pleasure of a temporary and ultimate respite from the sorrows that they suffer, the Bodhisattva will be reborn in samsara through the power of their bodhicitta, and they remain with beings, staying close with them in order to bring them to the undying state of supreme bliss referred to previously. They are like people who pitch refreshment, pitch as in erect, refreshment tents to pilgrims travelling through Sari. So Kunzang Pelden, he's referring to a very famous pilgrimage site in southern Tibet. He continues, Bodhisattvas bring to beings whatever happiness they desire. Thus they satisfy these ceaseless wanderers who are constantly moving towards their deaths without a moment's respite, never finding a place of permanent repose. All this is thanks to bodhicitta. With these words, Shantideva brings into focus the teaching of previous stanzas. So concerning the comprehensive capacity of bodhisattvas to fulfill all wishes, Geshe Doga says, he's referring specifically here to the mind generation of bodhicitta. This mind generation abides close to the supreme method for establishing happiness and satisfies the many guests from cyclic existence. The reason for that is that it establishes the higher status and the definite goodness of all sentient beings. So bodhicitta serves as a means to establish sentient beings in a temporary well-being of the most fortunate rebirth in cyclic existence. And while bringing their temporary pleasure and enjoyment, it ultimately brings the definite goodness of the state of liberation and ultimately enlightenment. This is a very beautiful and moving passage that I've just quoted from Geshe Doga, because it is showing how the idea of remaining close that Shantideva is talking about is referring to the intimacy of the commitment that bodhisattvas have to care for sentient beings. And it is so intimate that they will manifest especially in the samsaric place where sentient beings are dwelling, in order to immediately work in ways that are appropriate for their care and development. And then without letting go, without departing, will skillfully carry them step by step towards the greatest goals. So this, of course, is the great manifestation of our precious teachers, such as Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So it's really, I think, very important, especially at this time, to think in this great way about what it is that our gurus are doing. Not to get caught up in our own sense of loss, if you like, which is often connected to self-cherishing, because we've become very familiar with feeling good about having our teachers, but to really look at what our teachers are doing and why, and then throwing ourselves into the same project, because it's this that will please the guru and will also create the conditions for their long life and their turning the wheel of Dharma. So in this context, the means to accomplish the satisfaction of many guests is bodhicitta, which in this way becomes the most supreme offering to them. So thus, and we're leading up to Shantideva's next verse, it is a cause for festivities and celebrations of the highest order to occur. Never, never, never has there been a greater reason to feel jubilation. Shantideva, verse 34, today in the presence of the protectors, I invite the world to be guests at a festival of temporary and ultimate delight. May gods, anti-gods, and all be joyful. Kunzang Pelden, as do other commentators, indicate that this last verse is an exhortation calling for others to rejoice, whereas the emphasis of the immediately preceding verses was a call for us to rejoice ourselves. So Kunzang Pelden says, and so in accordance with what has been said previously, within the sight of the protectors, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas from whom he takes as his witnesses, Shantideva issues a summons on this very day to all beings, as infinite in number as the sky is vast. He invites them to the highest bliss of ultimate Buddhahood, and in the meantime, until such enlightenment is achieved, to the perfect feast of temporary happiness in the higher realms of gods and human beings. Let all the gods on the side of goodness, such as the 75 protectors of the heaven of the pure, as well as all the assurers, rejoice. For by being thus called upon to rejoice at Shantideva's Bodhisattva vow, they too will be happy. They will gain their share of benefit and bestow protection as well. So Kunzang Pelden takes the I here, as he does in many of his verses, to refer to Shantideva. But the point is that when we read I in the verses, we're identifying with it directly. It's also us. And so that's why I mentioned at the very beginning of my talks, it's as though Shantideva, when he uses the word I, is ventriloquizing our own thoughts. He's suggesting what it is that we should be thinking from within, deep, deep, deep within. It's not about what we should be doing and what we should be hearing. It's actually, can we conjure up that from the very depths of our own heart? So Kunzang Pelden continues, the reason for taking the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas as witnesses of the vow of bodhicitta is that one will have a sense of propriety with regard to them and a feeling of moral conscience with regards to oneself. So I just want to mention again that when Kunzang Pelden does talk about the I here, when we say it says I invite the world to be guests, we are also to feel that we are now able ourselves to invite the world to be guests at a festival of temporary and ultimate delight. And you could even venture to say that if we're not feeling that kind of joy, it's a lack of recognition on our part of the power of bodhicitta itself. We're failing to recognize what it is that we've just done and the great potential that we are now holding in our hand. If we're not going to, so this is a reminder, isn't it, of verse 28, which I've already discussed, but I'll quote it again. Just like a blind man discovering a jewel in a heap of rubbish, likewise, by some coincidence, an awakening mind has been born within us. This is precisely our situation. If we're not going to joyously celebrate our own good fortune upon as though inadvertently or even accidentally stumbling like a blind person upon a jewel buried in a heap of rubbish, then when? So if we're not going to celebrate our bodhicitta now, then when? As Kunzang Pelden says, the saying goes, writing formed by gnawing insects occurs by accident. It is not intentional. We have this in Australia because our gum trees, many of our gum trees shed bark. I'm sure you've got equivalents in your own places. And when that bark peels off, which is busily doing now in autumn, it reveals these extraordinary traceries that various wood-eating borers have made between the outer layers of the bark and the hard inner core of the tree. And they are remarkably like letters often, or Sanskrit seed syllables and so forth. So this analogy is incredibly powerful because in the same way as Shantideva says, it is as if by some mere chance configuration of karmic merit, amidst the refuse of our own defilements that characterize an ordinary being like myself, that the precious bodhicitta, the very thing that dissipates the drawbacks of both samsaric existence and peace, has arisen in my mind. So this is something completely amazing. And thus we are exhilarated with joy. As Kenshin Trungku Rinpoche says in his commentary to this verse, therefore, the joy has a prospect. Therefore, in the future, we will be able to relieve others of their suffering. It is for this reason that we ask them, referring to the protectors, gods, demigods, and all, to take joy in what we have just done. Therefore, we should feel that all special and ordinary beings are alike, having cause to celebrate on this occasion. Indeed, considered now as new bodhisattvas, we might propose that not to feel an irresistible burst of exhilaration, and I mentioned this a little earlier, is tantamount to failing to recognize what it means to take the bodhisattva vow in the manner Shantideva has so potently described, not just taking it, not just for ourselves, but for others. So we're to feel that all causes of self-doubt and even traces of despondency are instantly swept away. So again, this is something to keep in mind at this very, very painful time. On a deep level, we can nonetheless, even though we're feeling great pain of loss, sweep away our feelings of despondency because we have received from our precious teacher, Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the seed of enlightenment, which is nestled in our mind as our most precious gift. So why be despondent? Because it's through this ripening that we're going to be able to benefit all sentient beings. That is Rinpoche's sole purpose in being here with us, to teach us this method. So it's now our responsibility to carry that forward. So we're to be resolute in our promise to fulfill their wishes. We have committed to not abandoning this ambition of benefiting others right up until the attainment of full enlightenment. So because these other beings can also achieve liberation and full enlightenment, we can afford to be truly delighted that all happiness will be complete. So this is the meaning of the final line of the verse, at a festival of temporary and ultimate delight. With the precious mind of Bodhicitta, all get to share this festival of temporary and ultimate joy, with not one single sentient being forgotten or left out. This is why in the root lines of Mahayana mind training, a text attributed to Atisha, we find the pith instruction: cultivate constantly the joyful mind alone. This is a pith instruction. In those few words, all of what Shantideva has been presented, all of what Kadrol is asking us to do, all of what Ling Rinpoche is asking us to do, and our other precious teachers, is encapsulated. And curiously, or not so curiously, but fascinatingly, the Bodhicitta mind has been described here as the joyful mind. We know now why we're to consider it as joyful. We find a similar instruction in Chekwa Yeshe Dorje's 7-point mind training. The word alone means singularly. In other words, if we're endowed with a genuine mind of uncontrived bodhicitta, all that is beneficial will naturally follow. It is in this sense that we need rely on anything else. This is true whatever circumstances arise. Commenting on this very line, Chilbu Choki Geltsen says, quote, "This line suggests that having trained your mind and tasted the flavour of true Dharma practice, no matter what adverse circumstances befall you, you experience no disturbance within. For you immediately think, I will cultivate the remedy, the two awakening minds. Remaining unassailed in such a manner is also a measure of having trained your mind." So His Holiness, on the occasion of conferring the aspirational bodhicitta mind in France in 1991, which is found in For the Benefit of All Beings, and I quoted that passage in full last session, rounded off his own discussion of Shantideva's truly joyous words, an ecstatic call for celebration, with some immaculately down-to-earth and seriously sage advice. He says, he's been talking about joy and suddenly clunk. Now that we have taken this vow, he says, we should try to remain good human beings in our daily lives. We should not, for example, pretend to be very nice while we're in this tent, the teaching tent, and starting a fight with each other as soon as we get out. We should from now on try to have a positive and kind mind. We are going to be happy in this life. I really think that the future depends on the quality of one's mind, on a good mind. So we must try to be good people and to be good examples for those around us. The initiative to be like this has to come from each one of us individually. His Holiness then concludes, "Thank you all for listening so carefully. I myself try to practice bodhicitta in all situations, and I try as much as possible to encourage others to do so too. I find it is a practice that is entirely without danger and brings tremendous benefit." So His Holiness's advice here that the initiative to be like this has to come from each one of us individually is echoed by Gyaltsab Sabje in his poetic verse summary of the chapter, Shantideva's chapter, which is itself in the form of an exhortation. Gyaltsab Sabje writes, "They who understand they have attained a human rebirth with freedoms and endowments should strive in generating the two bodhicittas, the essential meaning of all the teachings of the conquerors, the sole path traversed by the tens of millions of their children." And Geshe Doga annotates Gyaltsab Sabje's summary verse, "Anyone who understands that they have attained such a human rebirth with its freedom, anyone who understands that they have attained such human rebirth with its freedoms and endowments, indicates that those who have the wisdom to understand the value of the precious human rebirth definitely need to strive in generating bodhicitta, which is the essential meaning of the teachings of the conquerors and the sole path of the tens of millions of their children." So thus ends the third chapter of Bodhisattva's way of life, called Taking Hold of Bodhicitta. From this point on, as indicated by Gyaltsab Sabje, Shantideva continues his psychologically cogent, because evolutionary account of the Bodhisattva's way of life by now systematically laying out the actual explanation of the stages of the path. So you'll recall that verse 27 of the last chapter said, "Thus, whatever actions I do from now on must be in accord with the family. Never shall I disgrace or pollute this noble and unsullied race." So Gyaltsab Sabje's heading for this verse was meditating on conscientiousness after having found such a mind. So we can take this to be the forecasting of the entire content and purpose of chapter 4, which is conscientiousness. We have indeed found such a mind, and now it is critical that we do not sully or degenerate it. As such, constitutes a disgrace and a pollution that we thereby bring to the noble and unsullied race of the Buddhas and their children. So the question we must ask ourselves at this point, can we meaningfully approach the third chapter without exactly appreciating why it is that Shantideva is, the fourth chapter, while Shantideva is extensively stressing the practice of conscientiousness immediately after we've taken the Bodhisattva vow. The question is why? Why is he doing it now? We've just been joyous. Suddenly we're dealing with conscientiousness. So the incumbent question is, why would a lack of conscientiousness mean that I would get to disgrace or pollute this noble and unsullied race, the very one that I have just so very auspiciously and so rarely joined? So in order to appreciate this more deeply, we really need to understand at the outset what is meant by conscientiousness. And we find the answer in the classic presentation of low rig, mind and mental factors. Conscientiousness is defined there as a secondary mental factor. This means it accompanies a primary consciousness. With a primary consciousness, you are simply aware of the fundamental data of anything. But with a secondary mental factor, we ascertain the distinctions and the qualities of an object. So they're talking very generally here. There are 51 secondary mental factors, and I'll just quickly go through this because it's not the place to give any kind of exposition, but there are 5 ever occurring or omnipresent mental factors, 5 object attentive mental factors, 11 virtuous secondary mental factors, the 6 deluded, the 20 auxiliary deluded, and the 4 changeable mental factors. So the virtuous mental factors, which are described as 11, are all either opponents to specific non-virtuous states of mind, or are by nature concomitant with a virtuous opponent. So this means they can accompany another mind that is working to quell an affliction as a sort of supportive auxiliary, if you like. So the 11 virtuous factors are faith, shame, embarrassment, non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, effort, pliancy, conscientiousness, number 9, equanimity, and non-harmfulness. Therefore, conscientiousness is listed as the 9th virtuous factor. And here, rather than being a direct antidote to a particular afflicted mind, it functions as concomitant with an antidotal mind, such as non-attachment, for example, or non-hatred. And this is made clearer by the definition. In the Compendium of Knowledge, we have the following question: what is conscientiousness? And the answer: it is a cultivation of virtuous qualities within abiding in non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, as well as effort, and guards the mind against contaminations. It has the function of thoroughly completing and fully establishing all mundane and supermundane success. So you can now appreciate that conscientiousness occurs within what I've called, for the sake of it, a constellated domain or a sphere of abiding within the operation of virtuous mental factors such as non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance. Of course, they're referring to the antidotes of 3 poisonous minds, and also effort, which we can take to be joyous effort. or joyous perseverance. So this definition is further refined in a necklace for those of clear awareness, clearly revealing the modes of mind and the mental factors. It adds, just as been said above, so we've got the same basic definition, it is awareness that accomplishes virtue within abiding in effort without coming under the influence of the afflictions, and it guards the mind against contaminations. End of quote. So this is a very precise and a very useful definition, and it's one to keep in mind as we navigate Shantideva's 4th chapter. Because conscientiousness has the function of acting as a support for achieving all mundane and supermundane success, as Yeshe Geltsen further explains, it is of the utmost importance as the root of all paths and grounds. So the root here means that without it, we can't achieve the paths and grounds. In fact, you could even argue that we can't stay on them. So to develop his point, Yeshe Geltsen quotes Nagarjuna, who refers to as the protector Nagarjuna, who says in his letter to a friend, this is stanza 13, the Muni taught that conscientiousness is the source of the nectar of immortality, and non-conscientiousness that of death. Therefore, for the sake of enhancing your virtuous qualities, respectfully always be conscientious. So this is precisely its function as the root of all paths and grounds that is to be seized upon by a newly born Bodhisattva. Tsongkhapa, as Yeshe Geltsen points out, further delineates its significance in his Highway to Enlightenment explanation of the ethics of bodhisattvas in terms of 5 types of conscientiousness. And these are based in turn upon a Sangha's Bodhisattva grounds, which is the source text of Tsongkhapa's commentary in this case. So number 1 is correction of past faults. So looking here at what purposes we do with conscientiousness, it's very important to keep this in mind. Correction of past faults in accordance with the Dharma. So if we're not conscientious, we won't have any inclination to correct our past faults in accordance with the Dharma, meaning to practice purification. Secondly, it ensures an earnest intention to do so in the future. Thirdly, it's a tightening of the mind, thinking how wonderful it would be if I could behave and abide in ways such that faults do not arise. And fourthly, in dependence on that, behaving and abiding accordingly. So, given its crucial role, this term occurs frequently in Dharma texts. For example, we find in the Great Mind Training collection, I quote, preventing degeneration of conscientiousness with respect to the precepts is as follows. From the precepts of going for refuge to those of a lay practitioner and of a novitiate, and finally a fully ordained monk or nun, and on through to the aspiration and engaging aspects of the awakening mind and the empowerments, in regard to each of the vows and ethical disciplines you have adopted, there should not be a single moment of relapse. That realizations fail to arise in us at present with respect to genuinely pure precepts, even though you have anointed yourselves with the teachings is due to destroying the very root of pure morality through a loss of conscientiousness. Because of this, you fail in whatever spiritual practices you undertake. So Samye Gompa, in his public explication of mind training, continues with a fascinating example of an all too typical situation in which conscientiousness has been lost. Quote, without genuine conscientiousness, you might travel to be in the presence of a yogi and then, openly waving a jug of beer, make claims such as, "Oh, all householders, I have a profoundly advanced meditation practice." You may thus engender wrong views in others through making an announcement like this and leading them to the hells. So be careful here. In this respect, you also need colleagues with whom you can regularly interact. We're referring here to the Sangha community in its broadest sense of people intent on virtue. So clearly then, a lack of conscientiousness hands us over to all kinds of pernicious influences, including social ones, and it loosens our personal restraint and sense of discretion to an even disastrous extent. So I think it's very much an example of Tibetan humor there, this idea of someone pretending to be a great realized yogi while flaunting a frothing jug of chung to the local villagers. It's a kind of a crass example, isn't it? But it's deliberately crass because this is what a lack of conscientiousness enables us to be. We become crass. We become capable of doing that sort of rude and kind of careless and in some ways revolting act. So we not only let down our own guard, but we even abandon our guard. So in short, we lose control of ourselves, and this pervades how we relate not just to the present, but also how we see our past and view our future, as Lama Tsongkhapa has indicated with his enumeration there. We see no cause to correct past faults in accordance with the Dharma. So now I think we're in a robust position to approach the first verse of the fourth chapter. That this is a summary or an encapsulation of the content of the fourth chapter is evident from Gyaltsab Sabje's heading, which is short explanation of the way to meditate on conscientiousness. So verse 1 of Shantideva's chapter reads, having firmly seized the awakening mind in this way, a conqueror's child must never waver. Always should she exert herself to never stray from her practice. So it's important to recognize here that having firmly seized the awakening mind in this way indicates that we're discussing now someone who has, as Geshe Jumpa Tekchok puts it, firmly grasped the two bodhicittas in their continuums. This means that they have both aspiring and engaging vows. This fact has a direct bearing on how we're to interpret the verses that immediately follow when the topic of what it means to give up bodhicitta is extensively presented. This is quite shocking. We've just been celebrating having bodhicitta, and now Shantideva's relentlessly driving home to a point where we're forced to look at the mechanics, the mechanism of giving this precious mind up. Of course, as he's going to very vividly explain, this is the most disastrous possible thing that we could possibly ever do. We're going to fall from the incredibly virtuous position that we currently have. So, in other words, these verses are not designed to refer, and this is important, they're not designed to refer to someone who has merely generated the wish to generate the mind of bodhicitta, and thus is not actually committed yet to engaging in the practices. Thus, such a person would correspond to the person who was invited by His Holiness to take aspiring mind of bodhicitta. But if someone has taken aspiring and engaging vows from the very depths of their heart, then without question, they are required to never stray from engaging in the trainings of the 6 perfections and the 4 means of gathering disciples in any way whatsoever. So in other words, they are to do this without slackening for even a moment. In the words of Geshe Jumpa Tekchok, having generated the 2 bodhicittas, the bodhisattvas are to train in the 6 perfections and the 4 gatherings, guarding them firmly without degenerating the instructions on how to train in the 6 perfections, which ripen one's own continuum, and the 4 gatherings, which ripen the continuums of others. So you can see here that our responsibility is to both, because if we're going to fulfill our bodhisattva promise, our bodhicitta promise, we need to consider how we're going to benefit others and how we're going to benefit ourselves to the degree that we're positioned to benefit others. So Geshe Jumpa Tekchok continues, through a union of mindfulness, alertness, and enthusiasm, the trainings are to be maintained. As Lama Tsongkhapa says in the Foundation of All Excellence, quote, with mindfulness, alertness, and enthusiasm, I will be conscientious. So before I go on, you can see here that Tsongkhapa is couching I will be conscientiousness within this arena of these other virtuous minds, with mindfulness, alertness, and enthusiasm are there in the definition. I will be conscientious with my 3 doors of body, speech, and mind, and through that I shall engage in the training of a bodhisattva's morality without fault. So for this person who has generated conventional or wished, sort of is intent on generating conventional and ultimate bodhicitta, the yoga of conscientiousness is crucial if our intended aims for both self and others are to be met. So in the next verses, when faults are described in terms of their very, very grave consequences, we're to understand them as incurred by a person already equipped with the 2 bodhicittas. In other words, these verses do not directly apply to someone who thinks, surely having bodhicitta would be a wonderful idea, and therefore something that I would one day like to generate. So the reason I bring this up is if we misread this point or fail to understand it, we may become frightened or even horrified by the coming verses and thus flee from the prospect of ever generating the mind of bodhicitta, mind of enlightenment. And this, of course, would be most unfortunate. In fact, it would be tragically unfortunate. In summary, Shantideva is seeking to help committed bodhisattvas preserve their practice continuously, increasingly, and thus without contradiction, deterioration, or gaps. And so Shantideva is now going to outline reasons, multiple reasons, why it is unsuitable to give up the awakening mind. And so this comes under the heading, explaining it extensively, and it begins with verse 2, the reason why it is unsuitable to give up bodhicitta. So I'm not going to launch into that today. I think we've arrived at an appropriate point to stop. I'm going to, when I've asked Lou before the session opened, just to give me a moment when we reach the point of the dedications of Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche's long life prayer, to say a few words. So otherwise Lou will read the prayers as normal. So thank you very much, Lou. I'll hand over.
Dedication prayers from Shantideva. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored, and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended.
So now I'm going to say a few words. I'm asking us to please pray and dedicate for Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche to be reborn as quickly as possible in a place where he can be very quickly recognized and be of the most benefits to sentient beings. Please try to keep fulfilling Rinpoche's holy wishes, especially, and I'm quoting the advice given by FPMT, especially to practice impermanence and bodhicitta in the context of the Lam Rim. Fulfilling the Guru's holy wishes is a very important part of inviting the Guru to return. And I'm going to quote Kabje Zopa Rinpoche. Every step we take with bodhicitta is a cause of enlightenment. Every action done with a sincere Dharma motivation for the happiness of future lives or for liberation, not just saying the words without feeling them in the heart, will create great merit. But with the ultimate motivation of bodhicitta, done sincerely from the heart, purely for others, we create unimaginable merit, shooting us to enlightenment incredibly quickly. This is, of course, particularly true of our Dharma practice. Whenever we do a Dharma activity, it can be a pure Dharma activity, suffused with bodhicitta, or a worldly action, a non-virtuous action, disguised as something holy. This is where conscientiousness comes in, doesn't it? Kunu Lama Rinpoche advises, if you're going to start something, start it with bodhicitta. If you want to think about something, think of it with bodhicitta. If you want to examine something, examine it with bodhicitta. If you want to watch something, watch it with bodhicitta. So now, with a mind of bodhicitta, dedicate to Rinpoche's quick return so that he continue to turn the wheel, to be the wheel-turning king for all our suffering mothers. And in my own practice, I'm reciting Kabje Sopa Rinpoche's name mantra as a way of kind of settling my emotional feelings at this time, and because it's the direct link with the Guru. Oma Guru Vajradhar Muni Shasana Shanti Sawa Siddhi Hung Hung. Oma Guru Vajradhar Muni Shasana Shanti Sawa Siddhi Hung Hung. Oma Guru Vajradhar Muni Shasana Shanti Sawa Siddhi Hung Hung. So thank you, Lou. We'll continue.
Should I recite his long life prayer?
No.
Okay. Tenzin Osulhita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Geshe Lobsang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space, the Dharma of the able one in general, and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common cities. Geshe Tupten Sherab, beloved teacher leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path. You are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. Chom Dan Da De Jen Sheikh Padra Chom Payang, Dag Prad Zog Pe Sangye Nampa Nang Ze U Ki Gyal Pola Shag Shalo, Jang Chub Sempa Chen Po Kyun Tu Sang Pola Shang Shalo, Tayeta Panchagriya Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayeta Panchagriya Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayeta Panchagriya Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayeta Panchagriya Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayeta Panchagriya Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayeta Panchagriya Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha, Tayeta Panchagriya Awa Bodhani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha.
I just wanted to mention, just in conclusion, that Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche is in Tukdam meditation. So it's inappropriate to talk of him in the past tense from that point of view. So just to keep that in mind as things unfold. So it's a time for deep personal reflection and resolution, and supporting our fellow students, so within the organisation as well, of course. So thank you very much.